Long ago, in the dry deserts of the American Southwest, lived an Apache warrior woman named Naili. She carried herself with the fire of her ancestors, her steps strong across the sand, her spirit like an eagle soaring above the cliffs. Among her people, she was celebrated for her courage in battle and her fierce loyalty to kin. Yet, in the shifting winds of fate, even the strongest warriors are tested. One night, during a brutal raid, fire and thunder shook the canyon. A sudden explosion sent rocks cascading down, crushing Naili's legs and leaving her trapped in a nightmare of dust and silence. When her tribe gathered in the aftermath, grief filled their eyes, but fear too. They believed she would never rise again, that a warrior who could not walk could no longer protect, no longer hunt, no longer bring honor to her people. As the sun blazed above, their whispers turned to decisions. They left her in the desert with only the memory of their care, believing mercy was to let her spirit return to the earth quickly. They turned their backs, leaving her body broken beneath the sky, abandoned as though she were already gone. The desert is merciless, yet it also listens. Alone, her breath shallow and her body throbbing with pain, Naili stared at the endless sky. Betrayal pressed on her chest heavier than the stone that had crushed her legs. She felt the sting of tears, but within that sorrow, anger rose like fire. She thought of her ancestors, warriors who had fought against impossible odds, who had stood even when the world pressed them into the dust. A voice within her heart whispered that strength was not in legs, but in spirit. She clenched her fists and swore she would not surrender. Her body dragged against the burning earth as she crawled. The sand scraped her skin raw, blood mixing with dust, but still she moved. Each inch felt like a mountain climbed, yet she refused to stop. Vultures circled high above, waiting for her to collapse, but she glared at them with defiance. At last, through cracked lips and trembling arms, she reached a hidden spring between the rocks. Cool water touched her tongue, and with it, life returned. She closed her eyes and whispered to the desert winds, "I will rise again. My spirit is not broken. Not now, not ever." The nights were long and full of shadows. Coyotes howled from the distance, and every rustle of the brush reminded her of danger. But Naili sharpened her mind in the silence. She broke stones into blades, carved branches into makeshift crutches, and wrapped her wounds with strips of cloth worn from her clothing. She taught herself to move, slowly at first, painfully at every attempt. But with each trial, her arms grew strong, her will sharpened like obsidian. She was no longer the woman she had been before, yet she was becoming something new, something greater, forged by suffering and survival. Days blended into weeks, and still she endured. The desert tested her every moment, the sun burning her skin by day, the cold biting at her bones by night. Yet Naili refused to vanish into silence. She hunted small animals with the weapons she made, gathering roots and berries when she could. Every step of progress felt like a small victory, every breath a reminder that she was alive. She thought often of her tribe, of the people who had left her. Their faces once brought her sorrow, but now they fueled her fire. She would not be erased so easily. One morning, distant hoofbeats echoed across the canyon. A group of settlers traveling westward found her near the spring. At first, they saw only a wounded woman, her body marked by scars, her legs gone to ruin. But when they drew closer, they saw the fierce determination in her eyes. They offered food and water, and she accepted, though she held herself with the pride of a warrior, not a beggar. When wild predators stalked the camp that night, it was Naili who showed them how to set traps, how to read the land, and how to survive where few could. The settlers quickly realized that this woman, though broken in body, carried the strength of 10 warriors. She became their guide through the desert, teaching them where water could be found hidden beneath stones, how to read the stars for direction, and how to defend themselves from raiders. Children sat close to her, listening to the rhythm of her voice as she spoke of courage, of standing tall even when the earth tries to pull you down. To them, she was not crippled. She was a living legend. Her scars became proof that survival was possible against all odds. Word of her spread along the trails, whispered among travelers and passed from fire to fire. They called her the legless Apache warrior, a name spoken with awe and respect. Though she had lost her legs, her presence commanded more honor than many who still walked freely. Her spirit carried weight, her story carried power. Those who met her felt changed, as though they had touched the edge of something sacred. She had become a bridge between worlds to the Apache roots of her birth, and the frontier life of the settlers who now walked beside her. But the whispers carried far, even reaching the ears of her old tribe. When they first heard the tales, some laughed, refusing to believe that Nellie had survived. Others felt shame in their hearts, remembering how they had left her behind. The stories told of her bravery, of how she turned weakness into strength, and some feared her return. For what greater wound could there be than knowing they had abandoned their warrior, only for her to rise as a legend beyond their grasp? She had become something they could no longer control, something larger than the tribe itself. Nellie, however, held no illusions. The pain of betrayal still lived within her, but it no longer bound her. She understood that her people were afraid, trapped in their own ideas of strength and weakness. They believed her useless, yet she had proven otherwise. She had found a new path, one not bound by the rules of those who once called her kin. Her life was no longer defined by what she had lost, but by what she had become. She was proof that spirit could outlive flesh, that will could shape destiny even in the harshest of deserts. Seasons passed, and Nellie continued to thrive. She crafted better tools, improved her crutches, and built a place of shelter where travelers could rest. Some called it the sanctuary, others a training ground. Those who came left stronger than before, carrying her lessons with them. She no longer needed to walk into battle. Her spirit had already walked further than most could ever imagine. The desert that once sought to claim her now seemed to protect her, its winds carrying her name across the sands. In her survival, she had not only saved herself, but countless others who followed. At times, she would sit beneath the stars, gazing up at the endless sky, remembering the night she was left behind. She thought of the vultures circling overhead, of the searing pain in her legs, of the emptiness in her heart when she realized her people were gone. And then she would smile, not in sorrow, but in triumph, for those same vultures had flown away hungry, and the desert winds had carried her voice farther than her tribe could have dreamed. She was not the woman they abandoned. She was something far greater, a spirit reborn in fire. Her life became a story told across the frontier, carried in whispers and retold in songs. To some, she was a cautionary tale of betrayal. To others, she was the embodiment of resilience, proof that strength does not die with the body. Children grew up hearing her name, learning that courage was not in the legs that carried you, but in the heart that refused to bow. She had once crawled across the burning sand, broken and forgotten, but now she soared higher than eagles in the minds of those who honored her. Nellie had become eternal. And so, the Apache warrior woman who lost her legs but not her spirit lived on, not just in the desert she conquered, but in the souls of all who heard her story. Abandoned yet unbroken, she rose from the dust to remind the world that no warrior is ever truly defeated until her spirit surrenders. Nellie's name would forever echo in the winds of the Southwest, a reminder that strength is not measured by what we have lost, but by what we refuse to give up. Service provides an opportunity to voice any of your texts, including articles, reports, separate chapters or entire book in a sequence, no more than 30,000 characters at a time. The name of the MP3 file is formed from the first 20 characters of the text. Save the generated MP3 file to your device for storing and future use offline. Please select language and voice. Adjustable speed, pitch and pauses between sentences and paragraphs. Days turned into nights, and Nellie's willpower kept her alive. Each sunrise brought new pain, but each sunset reminded her that she had conquered another day the desert had tried to take from her. Her arms grew stronger from the endless struggle to move across stone and sand. Her mind sharpened with every challenge, learning to think faster and strike smarter. She refused to become prey, and so she fashioned crude weapons from sharp stones, blades she could wield with deadly accuracy. She carved branches into makeshift crutches, and with every step, her spirit rose higher than the pain. When travelers on horseback stumbled upon her, they saw only a broken figure at first. Dust clung to her hair, scars marred her body, and her legs were bound in crude wrappings. They pitied her as one might pity the dying, But Nellie's eyes told another story, one of defiance, fire, and strength beyond flesh. When the settlers offered food and water, she accepted, not as a beggar, but as a warrior who traded knowledge in return. Soon they saw she was not helpless, she was a guide, a shield, and a force greater than they had imagined. Her lessons began simply. She taught them how to track water in the desert, how to read the land as if it were a living map. With patience, she showed them which plants were safe to eat, which would kill, and how to follow the stars when trails were lost. At night, when wolves or coyotes stalked the camp, it was Nellie who calmed the settlers' fear. She crafted traps from branches and stones, and when danger drew near, her arms moved like lightning, striking with the precision of a warrior born from hardship. The settlers began to trust her. Children followed her the most. They would sit near her, wide-eyed, as she shared stories of the desert twins and the ancestors who once ruled the mountains and plains. Her voice carried strength, no sorrow. To them, Nellie was not broken as she was powerful, a living flame that refused to die. She spoke of courage, of how warriors are not measured by what they have lost, but by what they refuse to surrender. Each child carried her words like seeds in their hearts, growing with the belief that resilience could conquer even the cruelest of fates. Nellie became their inspiration. As time passed, the settlers began to spread her story. Word carried along the trails of a legless Apache warrior who trained others in survival and strategy. She was not just a survivor, she was a teacher, a leader, a figure who turned weakness into strength. Strangers who had never seen her began to whisper her name with respect. She became known in towns and camps along the frontier, her legend growing each time it was told. Some called her a miracle, others a curse against betrayal, but all agreed on one truth: Nellie had risen higher than anyone believed possible. The settlers soon realized her strength was not only in survival but in leadership. When disputes broke out among them, it was Nellie who spoke with clarity and fairness, her words carrying the weight of wisdom. She reminded them that unity was survival, and division meant death. Slowly, they began to see her not as an outsider, but as one of their own. In her presence, even the strongest men bowed their heads with respect, for they knew she had endured what none of them could. Her authority was not forced, it was earned through fire, blood, and unbreakable will. At night, she would often sit by the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames. Though her body bore scars, her spirit burned brighter than ever. She thought often of the tribe that left her behind. She wondered if they had forgotten her name, if they spoke of her as though she were already dead. Yet, deep inside, she knew the winds carried her story back to them. Someday, they would hear that she lived, not as a crippled shadow, but as a legend whispered across the desert. And on that day, the betrayal that had once broken her would transform into victory. But legends do not grow without envy and fear. Raiders, hearing tales of the legless warrior, thought her an easy target. One night, they swept down upon the settlers' camp, expecting weakness. Yet they found Nellie waiting, her weapons sharp, her mind sharper. Though her body could not chase, she turned the battlefield into her weapon. She directed settlers into positions, guided their hands to strike where enemies would falter, and when the raiders closed in, she herself struck with blades of stone and fire. The attackers fled in shame. Humiliated by the warrior they thought helpless, Nellie's legend only deepened. Her victories became lessons carved into memory. She showed the settlers that strength was not only in the body but in the mind and spirit. With her guidance, they became harder to defeat, their journeys safer, their courage renewed. Soon, travelers came seeking her advice, even if only to hear her words. They brought gifts of food, cloth, and tools, not as charity, but as tribute to one they saw as more than human. To many, she was the bridge between worlds, of the Apache blood of her birth and the frontier life of those who followed the new path westward. Eventually, her name reached the ears of her old tribe. At first, they scoffed. They said no broken woman could survive the desert. But the stories continued, and soon shame stirred in their hearts. They had left her behind, believing her finished, yet she had become greater than before. Some feared her return, knowing she was proof of their betrayal. Others longed to see her, to ask forgiveness. But Nellie no longer lived for their judgment. Her spirit had grown beyond the chains of tribe and tradition. She had become something untouchable, forged in pain, reborn in fire. Still, she did not forget them. She carried their faces in her memory, not with hate, but as reminders of the path she had walked. Betrayal had been her first death, but survival had been her rebirth. She no longer wished to return to them as one of their own. If they came, she would face them with dignity, not as the abandoned warrior, but as the legend they could never destroy. For she had learned that belonging is not in the tribe you are born into, but in the strength you give to those who believe in you. As seasons passed, Nellie built more than just survival. She built the sanctuary at a place where travelers could rest, learn, and prepare before facing the harshness of the land. It became known as a haven, marked not by walls but by the spirit of its guardian. People came weak and left strong, carrying her lessons in their bones. Some called it the school of the desert, others a sacred ground. For all who visited, it was clear this place was alive because Nellie's will refused to die. She had transformed her pain into a home for others, her fire into light. At times, she would gaze at the horizon, remembering the day she crawled across burning sand with vultures above her. She thought of how close she had been to death, and how betrayal had almost crushed her spirit. Then she would look at the lives she had touched, the children she had guided, the families she had saved, the settlers who now walked stronger because of her. She realized her suffering had become her greatest gift. Without her loss, she would never have gained this unshakable power. She smiled, not with bitterness, but with triumph, for she had conquered fate itself. Her story traveled farther than she could ever walk. Minstrels in towns sang of the legless Apache warrior whose spirit rose higher than eagles. Hunters spoke of her wisdom, merchants of her fairness, mothers of her kindness. She became more than a woman, she became a legend stitched into the fabric of the frontier. Even as the years passed, her name carried strength, for Nellie had proven one truth that would never be forgotten: a true warrior is not measured by what she has lost, but by the fire in her spirit that refuses to be extinguished. And so, Nellie lived on, not only in body, but in memory, in song, and in the whispers of desert winds. The tribe that abandoned her would one day fade, as all tribes and towns do, but her story would endure, carried by those who found hope in her survival. She was no longer simply a woman of flesh and bone. She was resilience itself, carved into legend by the desert, immortalized by the courage that never left her heart. A warrior abandoned, but never broken. A spirit who rose higher without legs than most could with wings. Replace this text with yours.